It was a snowy day. Orbie discovered that if you leave your truck outside in a snowstorm, you might not find it again until spring. Katie found out that if you shovel snow in the wind, a lot of it blows back in your face. And they both discovered that if you lie still in the snow long enough, you'll get covered in it too. Orbie was very excited as he bounced up and down in his seatbelt. The car drove silently along the snowy roads. Mom made sure that the lid was on tight, then she put the hot chocolate container in her backpack. At last they were ready for their adventure. Orbie wasn't too sure what the adventure was. He had never been skating before. Dad told Orbie skating was easy. Orbie hoped Dad was right. Finally they arrived at the old clubhouse. It was almost buried in the snow. Dad spotted out the window of the car because there was some smoke coming out of the chimney. Someone else must have felt like skating, too. The clubhouse was on a small lake. At least, that was what Dad said, but when Orbie got out and looked for the water, he couldn't find any. All he saw was snow, snow, and more snow. Then Orbie saw one of the most peculiar things. He saw a toque go floating by on the snow. It was a red one with a big pom-pom. It turned round and moved closer and closer. Orbie had never seen anything like it, so he stepped over to Dad in case something really strange happened. The funny thing was that when the toque burst out from behind the snowbank, Andy was underneath it. He said hi to everybody. It was getting a little lonely skating by himself. His dad had a cold and was in the clubhouse watching from the window. Orbie burbled to Katie. Was Andy skating inside the snowbank? Katie straightened her earmuffs and told Orbie that Andy was skating on the lake. Orbie scratched a big red polka dot when he heard this. How could Andy skate on the lake without his water wings? You'll see, was all Katie said. Orbie walked behind Katie in the crunchy snow. When he got to the other side of the snowbank, he saw a great big plowed area. It wasn't a road because there were no cars on it. Katie sat on the bench beside it, and she asked Orbie to sit with her. Orbie looked out over the lake. What happened to the water? The lake was empty, Orbie wondered as he climbed up beside Katie. Katie looked at Orbie and told him that it certainly wasn't empty. The water was still there. Orbie looked again. She told him that in the winter, the air was so cold that it froze the water in the lake. Katie spread her hands and blew out steamy breath. The lake is like a giant ice cube, she said. Orbie looked again. He walked over to it. Katie must be right. It was flat and hard under Orbie's feet. Actually, it was flat and hard and very slippery. Orbie, he fell, kersplat. Mom and Dad were just coming around the snowbank with the skates. Dad helped Orbie up. He told Orbie that he would like skating a whole lot more once he had skates on. Orbie sure hoped so. Skates were funny-looking boots with sharp blades on the bottom. Orbie had never seen them before. They were hand-me-down skates from Katie. Dad tied them up nice and tight on Orbie's feet. Then he carried Orbie over to the ice and put him down. Katie and Andy were making their way over to him as Orbie ran into a little problem. One of Orbie's feet wanted to go forward while the other one wanted to go back. Orbie began to sink down. Put your feet together, Mom called. But, as you can imagine, it was just too late. Orbie landed with a thud on the ice. Dad helped him up again. He told Orbie that he would do better to take little tiny steps at first. Orbie tippy-tappied along the top of the ice. When he finally felt safe enough, he looked up and saw Katie and Andy gliding across the great ice cube lake. Orbie wondered how they did it. He tried to glide, but spun around in circles and couldn't stop. Mom grabbed a hold of him just before he fell for the third time. Dad was coming out of the clubhouse with a kitchen chair. Mom said the chair was just what Orbie needed. This confused Orbie, too, because he thought you had to stand to skate. Sitting might make it even trickier. But that was not exactly what Dad had in mind. First, Dad would take Orbie on a tour of the lake. Orbie was to sit on the chair and hold on. Orbie sat down, and within a second they were whizzing through the icy air on the flat surface of the lake. Dad told him this was what it felt like to glide. Orbie liked the feeling a lot. Then Dad put Orbie behind the chair and asked him to push it. Orbie's feet shot out backwards, and it was all Orbie could do, not to fall again. Dad told him to dig his skate into the ice. Orbie did this, and he and the chair started to move slowly. Dad encouraged him, and Mom clapped her hands every time he moved forward. Katie came over and skated beside him. Orbie was almost driving the chair. He began to understand how the skating thing was done, and he picked up more and more speed. Katie really had to race to keep up with him. He was going top speed and feeling fabulous. The wind was blowing a tassel on his toque. It was whistling past his knees, and the chair was almost flying across the ice, and the snowbank was headed right for him. Dad hadn't told him how to stop. Katie, who was struggling to stay with him, pushed the chair around, which was a good idea because Orbie went with it. He went with it, that is, until he flew into the snowbank. Orbie stuck his head out of the snow and raised his two arms up in the air. Katie was very worried about him and hurried over. Orbie looked at Katie for a minute, and it looked like he might cry. But then he did a flip right out of the snowbank and said in his own language that skating was just about the best thing he knew of. He tip-tapped over to the chair and took off for the other side of the lake. This time, Katie just couldn't catch him. Finally, Orbie let go of the chair. At first, he was a little shaky, but soon he steadied himself and began to glide. He threw his hands up in the air and burbled, "Look at me." He was having so much fun that he didn't even stop for hot chocolate. Soon he was better than Katie, who had been skating for 2 years. Orbie was different, and that made skating easy for him. It wasn't long before he was spinning in circles, and it wasn't long before he was balancing on one foot. And it wasn't long before he was skating backwards, and, well, Dad said he thought Orbie was just born to skate. Orbie thought so, too. And do you know that I think maybe he was?